Okay, so I had a blast playing Lovish. I originally saw the first trailer in the Mixed Fall Showcase 2024, where actually my game, Traveler's Refrain, was showcased as well. My initial impressions of the game were, okay, these devs are definitely calling back to a bunch of the retro games I love, and I was immediately intrigued. Even the design of the main protagonist and the party that you see at the beginning of the intro cutscene is totally a riff on the main party of Final Fantasy 1. And when I saw the game come to the Switch, it was an immediate buy for me, even though I didn't totally know what I was getting myself into. I knew just enough to know, like, this game is going to be for me. In the trailer, I saw some platforming segments, some, like, vampire survivor looking segments, and some, like, funny little cutscenes, and that was enough for me to know, like, all right, I should check this out. In terms of the look of the game, I was totally impressed. This game just exudes charm. In terms of the art style specifically, it has a very cute pixel art style, and it's not really like it's something new that you haven't seen before, but I think what should be praised about Lovish is the animation in the game. The main protagonist, Solomon, jumps and bounces around with a nice squishiness, and it just makes him feel very alive. Sometimes these retro platformers can feel a bit stiff, but the way Solomon moves feels really good. Also, man, the music was incredible. Some of these bumpin' retro tunes I had stuck in my head and I was humming to myself even after I put down the game. I feel like comedy is a really hard thing to nail down, especially on such a small scale like this, but Lovish did a really great job with it. In between the platforming sections, there's always a sometimes randomized cutscene. And it could be anything from Solomon walking down a hall and he trips and falls and loses a tooth and you lose out on some health. Or he encounters an AI amalgamation and you have to defeat it. Or some creepy guy comes out and he tries to like give you a hint, but Solomon gets freaked out and he runs away. And some of these segments are direct callbacks to other games. Like there's this one that I remember that was like a direct callback to the codex sequences in Metal Gear Solid, and that gave me a laugh. All of these little cutscene sequences don't necessarily contribute to the overarching plot, but they do showcase who Solomon is as a character, and he's not a great person. The main gist of this little story is that Solomon is out with his party companions and he ends up ditching them because there's this princess that he's in love with, and he's worried that his friends might essentially get to her before he does. So he ends up finding this helmet that gives him this ability to make anyone fall in love with him. And throughout the story, you end up kind of making the bosses like fall in love with you. So you're kind of on this quest to like capture the princess, but it's like in this really weird way. So it's kind of weird and it's kind of creepy, but that's also like what makes it weirdly funny and charming, because it kind of flips, the, hero saves the princess story on its head. He's essentially just a really insecure guy. So yeah, there's not much story to this game, but I think there's just enough that it entices you to want to know like how everything ends up resolving. The game design in Lovish was good. There was no mechanic that particularly stood out to me. A lot of what you're doing is these platforming segments. That's like the main gist of the game, and nothing ever gets incredibly hard like an old school, retro platformer or a game like Super Meat Boy. But this was actually kind of refreshing to me, because coming off the back of playing a bunch of like really difficult games, sometimes it's nice to play a game that's just challenging enough that you can kind of blow through levels and you kind of have a handle on what you're doing. And what makes Lovish, I think, really special is the fact that it doesn't quite have a Metroidvania element, but it's similar in the sense that you're collecting this currency called pennies, and there's shops that end up opening up. And for example, I ended up coming across a boss where it's this mouse and he's running across these like little platforms. And I realized like, okay, it's kind of hard to like run quickly behind him and whack him with my sword, but it would be really helpful if I could like attack down or up. And I remembered in the shop earlier on, you can pay for this ability that allows you to attack downward, kind of like Scrooge McDuck in the DuckTales game, or like Shovel Knight. So I bought that ability after like saving up, going back to some levels and kind of replaying them, and then I was able to eventually beat the boss. So beyond grinding sort of for pennies, the other thing that progresses the gameplay is that you can unlock these crowns. So there's always a hidden crown, there's a time challenge crown, and there's a crown you can get for completing the level without fighting any enemies, essentially. And it makes the game just feel like there's a bunch of these mini challenges. And sometimes these collectibles feel like they're for nothing, but there's a room where you can essentially acquire a certain amount of crowns to open doors that end up unlocking more abilities and more things to do. But this game is a really tight package. It's 70 levels that all take literally about like 30 seconds to get through, but there's just enough other stuff to do and just enough little cutscene moments and stuff like that that it feels like there's more breadth to a really small game with really tight mechanics. So that being said as well, like without spoiling too much of the extra stuff, there are a couple little mini game segments that happen in these like little cutscene moments. Sometimes you're literally just watching a little cutscene and then it's done. But occasionally you'll go into a little like Vampire Survivors segment, which just adds that extra little bit of flavor. Like, again, it's not anything that ends up being super challenging, but it's more that it's just funny that they're exactly riffing the game Vampire Survivors and you're getting to play that in a game that's not Vampire Survivors. I'll say too that when you think you finished the game, there's still more game to it. So I don't want to spoil exactly how that happens, but I like that kind of stuff as well, where you can just play through the main game and you're done if you want to be done, or if you want to try to become more of a completionist or like find the true ending sort of thing, there's more game for you to play. So I almost 100% of this game in about 5 or 6 hours. It was just like a couple sittings. But for a game like this, it felt like absolutely perfect. It didn't overstay its welcome, and there's just enough to do, and the mechanics are just fun enough that it keeps you going. The other thing I want to say really quickly too is I like that there's an attack. It's not just a platformer where you're bouncing around. You do have a sword attack, and there's different like abilities with the sword attack that, you know, spices up the gameplay just a little bit as well. So Lovish was one of those games where I was just smiling most of the time playing this game. Coming off some of these bigger, more challenging games, it was nice to sit down with a small indie game, knowing that, you know, I wasn't going to be overly frustrated, knowing that I was going to get some laughs out of it. And I just had a really fun time playing this. In a sense, it feels the same as a lot of retro games you've played. I feel like a lot of indie games recently have tried to inject so much of the AAA mentality in terms of like side quests and stuff to do and kind of just general bloat, that it was kind of refreshing to sit down and just play a small experience like this. And what I mentioned before about the progression system is what felt the most fun to me about this game. They gave you just enough stuff to want to go back and do, that you were incentivized to replay the levels, even though the levels are pretty quick. It was just enough of a challenge to feel enticed to actually keep going. I will say there were a couple platforming segments that were annoying. It wasn't necessarily hard, it was just annoying. Sometimes there's platformers where you basically have to like jump around something and you're kind of sitting on one block, and it almost feels like the character has to like be falling off of the block in order to have enough room to not hit your head on the thing above to jump around. So there are some things like that that felt a little bit annoying, but nothing ever ended up totally frustrating me. I found myself getting through the levels like pretty quickly, even when I was trying to do the time challenges. Mechanically as well, there is kind of like a one-hit KO system. So if you fall on spikes or if you get hit by an enemy, it is an instant redo, but the game resets like quickly enough that that also is really fast-paced. It doesn't ever get frustrating. And like I said, there's these little mini games that happen. And the one critique I would have with this game is it felt like some of the events were so randomized that you didn't get to do some of the mini game things quite enough. There were some of them that were a little bit more fun than others, and I would have liked to have experienced them more. And even though I probably played levels like when everything was all said and done like 200 times, only a handful of those times was actually doing some of these mini games. So I'd say like that could be something potentially in a patch or something like that that they could bump up that chance potentially. So I'm giving Lovish a 7 out of 10. It's really great to jump into one of these small indie games, especially when you don't exactly know where the experience is going to take you. I think it's a testament to how Developer Labworks injected just the right amount of charm and style into this game to make someone like me, who understands that it's this homage to games of the past, go right to the eShop and want to pick it up.